This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. An estimated 3.7 million people rallied across France Sunday in response to the Charlie Hebdo shootings and ensuing attacks that left 17 people dead. On Sunday, more than 40 world leaders traveled to Paris for the demonstration. At the Place de la République, demonstrators wearing Charlie Hebdo headbands waved French flags, and some sang La Marseillaise, the national anthem. Several mounted the Statue of the Republic, a symbol of the French Revolution, and hoisted up an inflated pencil to honor the killed Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. Here are some of the voices from the streets of France on Sunday.
We are free people in France, where everyone can live with one another, and it is important to voice and show it.
Beyond Charlie, it is about freedom of speech, secularism, all the values that make up France that have been rattled. But the fact of gathering together to see all these people gives back a lot of hope.
I sympathize with the people who have lost their loved ones. I would like to tell French people not to get confused, that at no time in not a single book related to religion, whether it be the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah, is it asked to kill one's fellow man or woman.
Everybody is concerned, not only in France, it's all the people. The entire planet Earth is concerned. That means we're united. All countries are free, but we are here to prove that France is a welcoming country and that we are really free to express our joy whenever we want.
Voices from Sunday's demonstration in France, one of the largest protests in the nation's history. Again, 3.7 million people marched across France. The march took place 2 days after the gunmen who attacked Charlie Hebdo, Sharif and Saeed Kouachi, were killed by police after a siege at a printing works plant following a 3-day manhunt. Minutes after the print shop assault, police broke a second siege at a kosher supermarket in eastern Paris. 4 hostages died there, along with the gunman, Amadi Coulibaly. France has announced it'll deploy 10,000 soldiers on home soil and post almost 5,000 extra police officers to protect Jewish sites. On Friday, Sharif Kouachi said he received financing by the Islamic cleric Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. He made the assertion to BFM TV before his death.
Well, tell you only that we were defenders of the Prophet Muhammad, and that I was sent, me, Sharif Kouachi, by Al-Qaeda of Yemen. I went over there, and it was Anwar al-Awlaki who financed me. Rest in peace.
Reuters is reporting both brothers who carried out the attack against Charlie Hebdo traveled to Yemen in 2011 and had weapons training in the deserts of Marib, an al-Qaeda stronghold. Meanwhile, a source within al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has provided The Intercept with a full statement claiming responsibility for the Charlie Hebdo attack. The statement reads in part, quote, "The leadership of ACAP directed the operation and have chosen their target carefully as a revenge for the honor of Prophet. The target was in France in particular because of its obvious role in the war on Islam and oppressed nations," unquote. Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula members have taken to social media and discussion boards to praise the attacks. Well, for more, we're joined by the article's author, Jeremy Scahill. He's co-founder of theintercept.org, where his new article is Al-Qaeda Source, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula Directed Paris Attack. His latest book, Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. It's now out in paperback. His film Dirty Wars was nominated for an Academy Award. He's also an author of the best-selling book Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. Jeremy, welcome back to Democracy Now!
Thanks, Amy.
Let's talk about this latest news out of France.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, you know, what we saw yesterday on display on the one hand, was very heartening to see so many people come into the streets. And, you know, one of the core issues of press freedom, if this is a moment where the whole world is saying we have to have a free press, and that no matter how controversial or hateful some of the speech is, or may be interpreted in some communities, that you know, we judge a free press by how we treat the journalists or the stories that we don't like or that we're offended by. But on the other hand, this is sort of a circus of hypocrisy when it comes to all of those world leaders who were marching at the front of it. I mean, every single one of those heads of state or representatives of governments there have waged their own wars against journalists. You know, David Cameron ordered the Guardian to smash with a hammer the hard drives that stored the files of NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. Blasphemy is considered a crime in Ireland. You had multiple African and Arab leaders whose own countries right now have scores of journalists in prison. Benjamin Netanyahu's government in Israel has targeted for killing numerous journalists who have reported on the Palestinian side, have kidnapped, abducted, jailed journalists. You know, there's this controversy right now, why didn't President Obama go, or why didn't Joe Biden go? You know, Eric Holder was there already and was representing the United States. You know, I think that, you know, we should remember, and I was saying this on Twitter over the weekend, that Yemen should have sent the Yemeni journalist Abdullah Haider Shaya as their representative. He, of course, was in prison for years on the direct orders of President Obama for having reported on secret U.S. strikes in Yemen that killed scores of civilians. Or Sudan should have sent Sami al-Hajj, the Al Jazeera cameraman, who was held for 6 years without charge in Guantanamo and repeatedly interrogated by U.S. operatives who were intent on proving that Al Jazeera had some sort of a link to al-Qaeda. So, you know, while there is much to take heart in terms of this huge outpouring of support for freedom of the press, hypocrisy was on full display in the streets of Paris when it came to the world leaders.
Reporters Without Borders issued a statement saying it, quote, condemns the presence of predators in the Paris March and, quote, is appalled by the presence of leaders from countries where journalists and bloggers are systematically persecuted, such as Egypt, Russia, Turkey, and United Arab Emirates. A Gabonese journalist covering the march expressed similar reservations about his president, Ali Bongo Ondimba, participating in the event.
He banned demonstrations in his own country, but is coming to a demonstration in France. That's intolerable for us. It's a complete hypocrisy. We're here not only to show our outrage for what happened to Charlie Hebdo, but also to show our outrage over the fact that dictators like Ali Bongo Ondimba are present here in Paris, in a country that supports human rights at an assembly that is in fact dedicated to freedom of expression, freedom of the press.
Okay. That a Gabonese journalist covering the march expressing reservations about his president participating in the march, Jeremy.
You know, you have General Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, who apparently is showing his solidarity for press freedom by continuing to preside over the imprisonment of multiple Al Jazeera journalists whose only crime was doing actual journalism, and scores of other Egyptian journalists that never get mentioned in the news media. Another thing that I think is really absent from a lot of the coverage of the aftermath of this horrific massacre is that France also is a surveillance state. And France has a very Islamophobic position toward their immigrant community, but also toward second and third generation Arabs or people from other Muslim countries who have settled inside of France. And there's going to be an intensification of an already overreaching surveillance system inside of France. You know, some months ago I was on the show talking about the U.S. watch listing system. And one of the things that we heard when we were doing this report on how you end up on the no-fly list or on the watch list was that people within the U.S. counterterrorism community who are actually trying to prevent acts of terrorism from happening say that they're flooded in information. and that if everyone is on the watch list, effectively no one is on the watch list when it comes to actually looking at who might be engaged in these kinds of terror plots. A similar phenomenon is happening in Paris, France. You know, people talk about an intelligence failure, an intelligence breakdown. When you are putting people on these lists for monitoring or surveillance based on flimsy or circumstantial evidence, what that means is that you overload your own bureaucracy. So on the one hand, you have a surveillance state that unfairly targets Muslims and immigrants in both the United States and in France. And on the other hand, you have a system that is intended to stop acts of terrorism or to monitor people that are plotting acts of terrorism that has become its own hindrance, its own biggest obstacle to actually figuring out the reality of these plots. And let's remember, while horrifying and reprehensible, these incidents represent a relatively minor threat to Western society. You know, in terms of the actual threats facing our society, this doesn't even rank in the top 5. And so, you know, to have this kind of a reaction is not only a waste of a tremendous amount of money, but it is going to encourage, I think, future acts of terrorism.
And of course, it is a horrific moment where people actually see it before them.
Right, but it's again, you know, let's remember that the United States bombed Al Jazeera in Afghanistan very early on after 9/11, then bombed the Sheraton Hotel in Basra, Iraq, where Al Jazeera journalists were the only journalists. Then they killed one of the most famous Al Jazeera correspondents in Baghdad in April of 2003, when Victoria Clark, you know, George Bush's Pentagon spokesperson at the time, basically said, if you're an unembedded journalist, you're with the terrorists, and if you die, it's not our fault. They shelled the Palestine Hotel, killing a Reuters cameraman and the Spanish cameraman Jose Cuso. So yes, we should be condemning any and all attacks, especially when they're killing journalists, no matter who the perpetrators are. But let's not act as though the West's hands are clean and that any one of those world leaders marching yesterday, that their hands are clean on these matters.
We're talking to Jeremy Scahill, founder of The Intercept. When we come back, we're going to talk about the article that he's written. Al-Qaeda's source, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula directed Paris attack. His latest book, Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.